The imperial palace of the Ottoman Empire stood imposing against the evening sky, its minarets and domes casting long shadows across the manicured gardens as the sun began its descent. Within the palace walls, Emperor Xavier Suleiman paced the ornate corridors, his embroidered kaftan sweeping the marble floors. The weight of his empire seemed to press down upon his shoulders, but it was not affairs of state that troubled him tonight. "Any change?" he demanded as the chief royal physician emerged from the imperial stables. "I regret to inform your majesty that Thunderbolt's condition has worsened," replied the physician, bowing deeply. "The fever persists, and he refuses all feed. We have tried every remedy at our disposal." Thunderbolt was not merely a horse. He was the last gift from the emperor's father before his death, an Arabian stallion of unmatched beauty and spirit. For 3 years, they had ridden together through victory and sorrow. Now, the magnificent creature lay dying, and all the power of the Ottoman Empire could not save him. "Your Majesty," ventured Grand Vizier Ahmet, who had maintained a respectful distance during the exchange, "perhaps it is time to accept that. I will hear no such talk." Xavier cut him off, his voice dangerously quiet. "Continue your efforts. Send for physicians from across the empire if necessary." As dawn broke the following day, a commotion at the palace gates drew the attention of the guards. A young woman stood arguing with the sentries, her simple blue dress and modest headscarf marking her as a commoner. "I must speak with someone about the emperor's horse," she insisted, her voice carrying a trace of an accent from the eastern provinces. "I can help." The captain of the guard might have turned her away, but something in her earnest green eyes gave him pause. "Your name, girl?" "Violet Gülbahar," she replied, straightening her shoulders despite her obvious fatigue. "I am an herbalist from the mountains of Anatolia." Within the hour, the Grand Vizier found himself in the unusual position of presenting a peasant woman to the emperor during his morning council. Xavier sat on his ornate throne, dark circles beneath his eyes betraying his sleepless night. "Your Imperial Majesty," the vizier began cautiously, "a woman has come claiming knowledge that might save your stallion. She is but a common herbalist, yet she was most insistent." Xavier's gaze fell upon Violet. Unlike most commoners brought before the emperor, she met his eyes directly before remembering herself and lowering her gaze in a belated show of deference. "You believe you can cure what my royal physicians cannot." Xavier's tone was skeptical, tinged with the bitterness of impending loss. "I make no guarantees, Your Majesty," Violet replied, her voice soft but clear. "But I have seen this sickness before in the mountain horses of my village. I know remedies passed down through generations, knowledge not found in your physician's books." The emperor studied her for a long moment. "And what would you require for this attempt?" "Access to the imperial gardens and permission to gather certain plants. I will need to prepare the medicine myself." Xavier glanced at his vizier, who offered a slight shrug. What harm could there be in one final attempt? "Very well," the emperor declared. "You have until sunset tomorrow. If Thunderbolt shows no improvement by then, you will leave as you came." Violet bowed deeply. "Thank you, Your Majesty." As she turned to follow the appointed guard to the stables, Xavier called after her. "The horse means a great deal to me, Herbalist. Do not give me false hope." "Hope is never false, Your Majesty," she replied. "It simply requires patience to bear fruit." In the imperial stables, Violet found the magnificent Arabian stallion lying on his side, his once glossy black coat dull with sickness. Royal grooms and physicians hovered nearby, their faces reflecting a mixture of skepticism and curiosity at the newcomer. Kneeling beside the horse, Violet ran her hands gently along his neck, murmuring in a dialect few at court would understand. She examined his eyes, his gums, the rhythm of his labored breathing. "How long has he been refusing water?" she asked the head groom. "Since yesterday morning, miss." Violet nodded thoughtfully. "I will need fresh water, clean cloths, and a brazier for heating. And I must visit your gardens immediately." Over the next hours, the palace staff watched in bewilderment as this strange woman collected specific plants from the imperial gardens, some prized flowers, others considered mere weeds. In the stables, she worked with quiet efficiency, brewing foul-smelling concoctions and grinding pastes with a small mortar and pestle she had carried in her modest pack. As evening approached, Xavier returned to check on the progress. He found Violet sitting cross-legged beside Thunderbolt, singing softly as she applied a poultice to the horse's chest. "What are you doing?" he asked, startling her. "An old song for my mountains," she explained, resuming her work without breaking rhythm. "Healing is not merely physical, Your Majesty. The spirit must also find its way home." Xavier watched as she coaxed the horse to drink a bitter-smelling brew, stroking his muzzle and speaking in that same melodious dialect. For the first time in days, Thunderbolt seemed to respond, taking small sips. "You have a gift with animals," Xavier observed. Violet smiled faintly. "My father was a horse trader before the drought took our farm. He taught me their ways." She hesitated, then added, "I recognize this horse's bloodline. He comes from the eastern steppes, does he not? They require different care than the western breeds." Xavier's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You know Arabian bloodlines?" "I know horses," she corrected gently. "Each has its own character, just as people do." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the Grand Vizier, who cleared his throat significantly. "Your Majesty, the British ambassador awaits you in the blue salon." With a reluctant nod, Xavier departed, but not before casting a final glance at the strange woman who spoke to horses, as if they were her confidants. That night, Xavier found himself unable to sleep, his thoughts returning to the herbalist and her gentle hands. Shortly before midnight, he donned a simple robe and made his way to the stables, dismissing the startled guards with a gesture. He found Violet asleep on a pallet of straw beside Thunderbolt, one hand resting on the horse's flank. The stallion's breathing seemed easier, his coat less dull. As Xavier approached, Violet stirred, instantly alert. "Your Majesty," she murmured, hastily arranging her headscarf. "How is he?" Xavier asked, kneeling without concern for his fine garments.
"Fighting," she replied.
"The fever has broken, but he remains weak. I must prepare another infusion before dawn." Xavier settled beside her in the straw, an unprecedented informality that would have scandalized the court. "Tell me about these remedies of yours." Violet hesitated, then spoke of ancient knowledge passed through generations of mountain healers, of plants that grew only in hidden valleys, of the delicate balance between the elements that constituted life. Xavier listened, transfixed not just by her words, but by the passion with which she spoke, her hands gesturing gracefully in the lantern light. "How did a horse trader's daughter become so learned in medicine?" he asked at last. Violet's expression grew distant. "My grandmother was a healer of great renown in our region. When the plague came to our village 10 years ago, she taught me everything before succumbing herself." She glanced at him. "Knowledge is the only treasure that increases when shared, Your Majesty." "Please," he said impulsively, "when we are alone, call me Xavier." Her eyes widened. "That would be most improper." "As is the Emperor sitting in straw at midnight," he countered with a smile that transformed his austere features. "Yet here we are." They talked until the small hours, Xavier sharing tales of state affairs and court intrigues while Violet spoke of mountain traditions and the simple wisdom of village life. When she finally rose to prepare Thunderbolt's medicine, Xavier watched her work with a newfound appreciation. "You should rest, your Xavier," she corrected herself, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "The Empire cannot function with an exhausted emperor." "The Empire has functioned through far worse than my fatigue," he replied, but he took his leave, carrying with him the memory of her voice in the darkness. By the next evening, Thunderbolt showed remarkable improvement, standing shakily but with clear eyes and an interest in his surroundings. The royal physicians watched in barely concealed astonishment as Violet fed him a mixture of herbs and honey. "Impossible," muttered the chief physician to his colleagues. 3 days ago, the beast was at death's door. "Not impossible," Violet corrected quietly. "Simply a different knowledge than yours." When Xavier arrived to witness Thunderbolt's recovery, his face lit with genuine joy, an expression so rare that several courtiers later commented on it. The emperor approached his beloved horse, stroking the proud neck as the stallion nickered in recognition. "You have accomplished a miracle, Violet Gülbahar," Xavier declared, loud enough for all present to hear. "Name your reward." Violet bowed her head. "I seek no reward, Your Majesty. It was an honor to serve." "Nevertheless, you shall have one," he insisted. "Perhaps a position at court? Our royal stables could benefit from your expertise." A murmur rippled through the gathered nobles. A commoner offered a court position? The Grand Vizier's expression tightened with disapproval. "Your Majesty," Violet replied carefully, "I am honored beyond words. But my place is in the mountains. My village depends on my skills, especially with winter approaching." Xavier's expression flickered with disappointment before he masked it. "As you wish. But you will at least stay until Thunderbolt's recovery is complete." "Of course," she agreed. "Another week should suffice." That week stretched into 2 as Thunderbolt continued to regain his strength. Violet found herself granted unprecedented access to the Imperial Gardens and Library, where she spent hours studying rare botanical texts from across the Empire. Xavier made a habit of joining her in the evenings, ostensibly to check on his horse, but increasingly to engage in conversation that ranged far beyond medicine. Court gossip inevitably followed. The Valide Sultan, Xavier's formidable mother, summoned the Grand Vizier to her private chambers to express her concern. "This village girl has been here nearly a month," she observed, her fingers working a string of prayer beads. "And my son visits the stables daily, like a common groom." The emperor's attachment to the horse is well known. The vizier replied diplomatically. "It is not the horse that concerns me," the Valide Sultan said sharply. "I see how he looks at her. He has refused to consider the Circassian princess we suggested, and now I understand why." The vizier bowed deeply. "What would you have me do, Your Highness?" "Nothing yet," she decided after a moment's reflection. "But watch closely. The Ottoman throne cannot be compromised by a commoner's charms, no matter how skilled she may be with horses." Unaware of these machinations, Violet and Xavier continued their unusual friendship. One evening, as they walked Thunderbolt around the private Imperial Garden, Xavier spoke of his childhood, not the official history taught to courtiers, but the lonely reality of a boy raised to rule. "My father was distant," he confided, believing that hardship builds character in a future emperor. "The only time I saw his approval was when I mastered horsemanship." He stroked Thunderbolt's muzzle. "This horse was his final acknowledgement that I had become the man he wished me to be." Violet listened, hearing the unspoken grief beneath his words. "The greatest burden of power must be its isolation," she observed. Xavier looked at her with surprise. "Few at court would dare speak so directly." "Perhaps that is why you are speaking with me instead of them," she replied with a small smile. Their hands brushed as they both reached to adjust Thunderbolt's halter. The contact lasted only a moment, but Xavier felt it like a current through his body. Violet drew back quickly, her cheeks flushed. "It grows late, Your Majesty," she said, reverting to formality. "I should return to my quarters." "Violet," he began, but whatever he meant to say remained unspoken as the garden gate opened to admit the Grand Vizier. "Your Majesty," the Vizier announced, bowing, "forgive the interruption, but an urgent dispatch has arrived from the eastern provinces." The moment broken, Xavier nodded curtly.
"Very well."
"Good night, Mistress Gülbahar." As Violet made her way back to the modest chamber she had been assigned, a court lady fell into step beside her, Layla Hanum, the Valide Sultan's chief attendant. "The herbalist who has captured everyone's attention," Layla remarked, her tone pleasant but her eyes calculating. "The Valide Sultan wishes to meet you tomorrow." Violet's heart raced. The emperor's mother was known for her shrewd intelligence and fierce protection of the imperial bloodline. "I would be honored," she replied carefully. "Indeed," said Layla. "Few commoners receive such an invitation. Though I understand you have already received extraordinary privileges." Her glance was pointed. That night, Violet wrote a letter to her village elder, explaining her continued absence. As she sealed it with wax, she wondered if she was being foolish to remain. Thunderbolt was nearly recovered. Her task was complete. Yet something held her in Istanbul, something more dangerous than she cared to admit, even to herself. The next morning, Violet was escorted to the Valide Sultan's private reception room, a chamber of such opulence that she had to force herself not to stare. The emperor's mother sat on a divan, surrounded by attendants. Though in her 60s, she remained a striking woman, her posture regal and her gaze penetrating. So, the Valide Sultan began without preamble. "You are the miracle worker who saved my son's precious horse." Violet bowed deeply. "I merely applied remedies known to my people, Your Highness. And in doing so, you have earned the emperor's gratitude." The older woman studied her intently. "Tell me of your family, child." For the next hour, Violet answered questions about her background, her village, her training as a healer. The Valide Sultan listened carefully, occasionally exchanging glances with Layla. "You are educated beyond what one might expect," the Valide Sultan observed at last. "You read and write in several languages. You understand complex medical texts, yet you claim to be a simple village herbalist. Knowledge seeks those who pursue it, regardless of birth," Violet replied, then added hastily, "Your Highness." A faint smile touched the older woman's lips. A diplomatic answer. "I understand now why my son finds your conversation stimulating." She leaned forward. "But you must understand something, Violet Gülbahar. The emperor's attention brings both privilege and danger. There are many at court who would resent a commoner rising too quickly, no matter her talents. I seek no rise in station, Your Highness." "Perhaps not intentionally." The Valide Sultan's voice softened slightly. "You seem sincere, which is refreshing in these halls. But intentions matter less than consequences. Be careful with my son's regard. It can crush as easily as it elevates." As Violet left the audience, her mind whirled with the implications of the Valide Sultan's words. Had she been warned away from Xavier, or merely cautioned about court politics? She was still pondering this when she encountered the emperor himself in the corridor leading to the gardens. "Violet," he said warmly, then noticed her troubled expression. "What's wrong? Has someone offended you?" "No, Your Majesty," she assured him quickly. "I have just had the honor of meeting your mother." Understanding dawned in Xavier's eyes.
"Ah.
"And did the Valide Sultan impart her wisdom regarding your position here?" "She was most gracious," Violet said diplomatically. Xavier's laugh held little humor. "My mother is always gracious while wielding her influence like a scalpel." He offered his arm, an intimate gesture that made Violet hesitate before cautiously accepting it. "Come, walk with me. I have something to show you." He led her through a series of increasingly private gardens until they reached a small, walled enclosure that Violet had never seen before. Unlike the formal imperial gardens, this one grew in beautiful disarray. Medicinal herbs mingled with rare flowers in natural groupings around a small fountain. "My mother's private garden," Xavier explained. "She was raised by a renowned herbalist before her marriage was arranged to my father. Few know of her interest in plant lore. She considers it unsuitable for her public image as Valide Sultan." Violet gazed around in wonder. "These plants, some I've only read about in ancient texts. That flowering shrub is from Persia, believed extinct in the wild. Perhaps you and my mother have more in common than either of you realize," Xavier suggested, watching her face light with discovery. "She may test you, but she respects knowledge and strength." As they explored the garden together, Xavier spoke of state matters, border disputes with Russia, negotiations with European powers, the delicate balance of modernization and tradition. He asked her opinion on several points, seeming genuinely interested in her perspective. "You speak to me of affairs beyond my station," Violet said at last. "Why?" Xavier was silent for a moment, running his fingers through the water of the fountain. "Because you see me as Xavier before Emperor. Because you speak truth rather than flattery." He met her eyes. "Because when I am with you, the weight of the empire feels less crushing." The intensity of his gaze sent a tremor through Violet's body. She took a step back, suddenly aware of how alone they were in this secluded garden. "Your Majesty, must you still call me that when we are alone?" he asked softly. "I must," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. For both our sakes. The moment hung between them, fragile and charged. Then the distant call of the muezzin broke the spell, reminding them of the world beyond the garden walls. I should return a thunderbolt, Violet said, grateful for the excuse. Xavier nodded, his expression unreadable. Of course. That evening, as Violet tended to Thunderbolt, now almost fully recovered, the head groom approached her with an official-looking document. From the Grand Vizier's office, he explained. Your services are no longer required. You are to depart tomorrow with a purse of gold as reward for your service to the Empire. Violet felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. But Thunderbolt still needs his final treatments. The royal physicians will follow your instructions, the groom said, not unkindly. The order comes from the highest authority. She knew better than to ask if it was the Emperor's command. Such dismissal could only come from the Valide Sultan or the Grand Vizier, acting to separate her from Xavier before whatever was growing between them could take root. With heavy heart, Violet prepared for departure, packing her few belongings and writing detailed instructions for Thunderbolt's continued care. She had known this day would come, had told herself repeatedly that her place was in her village, not in the glittering, dangerous world of the imperial court. Yet as dawn broke on what was to be her final day in Istanbul, a palace guard appeared at her door with a message, not a formal court document, but a folded piece of paper sealed with plain wax. Meet me at the small dock behind the Rose Pavilion at midday. Tell no one. The note bore no signature, but Violet recognized Xavier's bold handwriting. She crumpled the paper in her fist, torn between wisdom and desire. To disobey the vizier's dismissal was dangerous. To meet the emperor in secret, more dangerous still. Yet at midday, she found herself hurrying through the less-traveled paths of the palace grounds to the Rose Pavilion, a summer house that extended partially over the waters of the Bosphorus. Behind it, a small wooden dock provided private access for the imperial family. Xavier waited alone, dressed, simply by his standards, in a dark blue kaftan without the usual elaborate embroidery. His face brightened when he saw her, then fell as he noticed her traveling clothes. So it's true, he said. They ordered your departure. It is time, Violet replied, striving for composure. Thunderbolt as well, and my village needs me. And what of what I need? Xavier stepped closer, his voice low and intense. Did you know nothing of this dismissal? How could I question such an order? She countered. I am a commoner who has already stayed far beyond her purpose. Xavier's expression hardened. This is my mother's doing or Amit's. They fear your influence. Perhaps with reason, Violet said softly. What is happening between us cannot continue, Your Majesty. You are the Emperor of the Ottoman Empire. I am a village herbalist. Is that all you see when you look at me? The Emperor? No, she admitted, the word barely audible over the lapping of water against the dock. That is why I must go. Xavier took her hands in his, an action so improper that Violet gasped. I have arranged a boat to take us across the Bosphorus, he said urgently. There is a villa on the Asian shore where we can speak privately, away from the court's eyes and ears. Just for today. Will you come? Violet knew she should refuse. Every lesson in propriety, every warning about court politics, every caution from the Valide Sultan told her to walk away now, to return to the safety of her mountains. Instead, she found herself nodding. Just for today. The small caique carried them swiftly across the strait, its oarsmen discreetly silent as the European shore of Istanbul receded behind them. Violet sat opposite Xavier, the intimacy of the small boat both thrilling and terrifying. Neither spoke until they reached a private landing attached to a walled garden on the Asian shore. The villa was modest by imperial standards, a summer retreat built in the traditional Ottoman style with wide eaves and latticed windows. As they walked through its quiet rooms, Xavier explained that it had belonged to his grandmother, used when the main palace became too stifling in summer. Few at court even remember its existence, he said. I come here when I need to think without the constant pressure of imperial expectations. In a light-filled salon overlooking the Bosphorus, a simple meal had been laid out on low tables, fresh bread, olives, cheese, and fruit. No servants waited in attendance. They were truly alone. Please, Xavier gestured to the cushions.
Seat. Eat.
They shared the meal in companionable silence, watching the ships pass along the strait. Afterwards, Xavier led her through the villa's gardens, pointing out rare plants he thought might interest her. In this private setting, away from the formality of court, he seemed younger, less burdened. "If I were not emperor," he said abruptly as they stood beneath a flowering almond tree, "if I were simply a man, what would you think of me?" Violet considered the question seriously. "I would think you intelligent, curious about the world, capable of both great passion and deep thought." She smiled slightly. "And perhaps a bit too accustomed to having your own way." Xavier laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his features. "Fair assessment. And if you were not bound by the constraints of my position, what would you say to me now?" The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility. Violet took a deep breath. "I would say that I have come to care for you in a way that frightens me. That when I return to my village, I will carry memories of our conversations like precious stones to be examined in private moments." Xavier's expression softened. He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw, and touched her cheek with a gentleness that made her heart ache. "And if I told you that the thought of your departure leaves me feeling as though the sun itself were being removed from my sky?" "I would say that poetry cannot change the reality of our stations," Violet whispered, though she did not move away from his touch. "Reality can change," Xavier insisted. "I am the emperor. If I wished to appoint a court physician with expertise in traditional remedies, who would gainsay me?" "Everyone," Violet replied with a sad smile. "Your mother, your vizier, the religious authorities, the noble families. You know this, Xavier. A commoner cannot rise so high without consequences." "Then what would you have me do?" He was close now, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. "Forget you? Return to the endless parade of suitable princesses and diplomatic marriages." "I would have you be the emperor your people need," she said. "And I must be the healer my village depends upon." Xavier's hands framed her face, his touch reverent. "For today, can we simply be Xavier and Violet? Tomorrow, duty will reclaim us both. But today—" Violet knew she should resist, that each moment in his presence only deepened a connection that could never be fully realized. Yet as his lips met hers in a kiss both tender and urgent, she allowed herself this one day of impossible dreams. They spent the afternoon in the villa's gardens, talking of everything and nothing, childhood memories, favorite books, dreams never shared with another soul. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the Bosphorus, reality intruded once more. "I must return before my absence is noted," Xavier said reluctantly. "And you?" "I leave for my village at first light," Violet finished for him. "My escort is already arranged." Xavier took her hands in his. "This need not be goodbye forever. I travel through the empire regularly. The eastern provinces require imperial attention as much as any other region." Violet smiled sadly. "Your Majesty." "No," he interrupted. "Not here, not now." "Xavier," she corrected softly, "we both know what must be. You have an empire to rule, alliances to forge, an imperial line to continue. I have my village, my patience, the path I was born to follow." "And if I ordered you to stay?" he challenged, though his tone held no real threat. "Then you would not be the man I have come to admire," she replied simply. Their return journey across the Bosphorus was silent, each lost in private thoughts as the lights of Istanbul grew closer. At the small dock where their day had begun, Xavier helped her from the boat, holding her hand a moment longer than necessary. "I have something for you," he said, pressing a small object into her palm. "A token of my gratitude for Thunderbolt's recovery." Violet opened her hand to find an exquisite miniature book, its covers inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Inside were detailed illustrations of medicinal plants from across the empire, some familiar, others she had only read about. "It belonged to my grandmother," Xavier explained. "I think she would approve of its new owner." Tears threatened to spill from Violet's eyes. "I will treasure it," she whispered. One last thing, Xavier said, his voice taking on a formal quality. As Emperor, I hereby grant you and your village imperial protection. My seal will be affixed to a document naming you as an honorary physician to the imperial stables. Should you ever require anything, resources for your healing work, protection from local officials, you need only present this document. Violet understood the gift for what it was, not just protection, but a connection, a legitimate reason for future communication. Thank you, Your Majesty, she said, dropping into a deep curtsy. You honor me beyond words. Their farewell was necessarily brief and public, observed by the ever-present palace guards. As Violet walked away toward her quarters for one final night in Istanbul, she felt Xavier's gaze follow her until she turned the corner and disappeared from sight. Dawn found her in the palace courtyard, a small escort of imperial guards ready to accompany her on the long journey to her mountain village. As she mounted the horse provided for her travel, a handsome bay mare from the imperial stables, the Grand Vizier appeared. The Emperor sends his regards and wishes you safe travels, he said formally. He regrets that affairs of state prevent him from bidding you farewell personally. Violet inclined her head. Please convey my gratitude to His Majesty for his generosity. As the small party passed through the palace gates into the bustling streets of Istanbul, Violet refused to look back at the gleaming domes and minarets. The day with Xavier, already assuming the quality of a dream in her memory, must remain locked in her heart, a treasure to sustain her through the long, dutiful years ahead. 6 months passed. Violet returned to her village life, her days filled with the familiar rhythm of healing work. The imperial document Xavier had given her hung in a simple frame in her cottage, occasionally drawing curious glances from patients, but rarely mentioned. Spring came to the mountains, bringing new growth and the annual influx of travelers as mountain passes cleared of snow. One morning, as Violet gathered early herbs in the meadow above her village, she heard the approach of horses, many horses, moving with the disciplined rhythm that spoke of military training. Her heart raced as she saw imperial standards fluttering above a column of Ottoman cavalry winding up the mountain road toward her village. At their head rode a figure she would recognize at any distance, his posture regal even after what must have been days of travel. The villagers emerged from their homes in alarm at this unprecedented arrival. The headman hurried forward as the imperial party reached the village square, dropping into a deep bow. Your Imperial Majesty honors us beyond measure, he stammered. Had we known of your visit, there is no cause for concern, Xavier assured him, dismounting with fluid grace. His gaze swept the gathered villagers until it found Violet, who had hurried down from the meadow. I come on a matter of some urgency regarding your village healer. Whispers erupted among the villagers as Violet stepped forward, bowing deeply. Your Majesty, she said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. How may I be of service? Xavier's expression remained properly imperial, giving nothing away. A matter of state importance requires your expertise, Mistress Gülbahar. My royal mother, the Valide Sultan, has fallen ill with a malady that confounds our court physicians. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the crowd. The emperor himself, traveling to their remote village to seek help for the Valide Sultan? She spoke most highly of your knowledge of traditional remedies, Xavier continued, and insisted that no other healer would do. I trust you will not refuse this imperial request. Violet understood the elaborate charade for what it was. Xavier had found a reason to see her again, a reason no one at court could question. The Valide Sultan's cooperation suggested either a genuine illness or, more intriguingly, her tacit approval of this arrangement. I am honored by Her Highness's faith in my humble abilities, Violet replied carefully. Of course I will come. I require only a short time to gather necessary supplies and provide instructions for my patients here. As the villagers dispersed to prepare suitable refreshments for their imperial visitors, Xavier stepped closer to Violet, lowering his voice. Forgive the deception. My mother is indeed unwell, though not critically. She suggested this plan herself. Violet's eyes widened in surprise. The Valide Sultan approved this? After months of watching me pine for that mountain herbalist, as she calls you, She decided that your continued absence was more disruptive than your presence would be. His eyes held a warmth visible only to her. She is a practical woman, my mother. And she was quite impressed by your fortitude in walking away from imperial favor. I never thought to see you again, Violet admitted softly. I never intended to let you go so easily, Xavier replied. Though I've had many months to consider what form our connection might take that honors both your independence and the realities of my position. Before she could respond, the village headman approached, forcing them to resume their formal demeanor. But as preparations were made for their departure to Istanbul, their eyes met in shared understanding. Whatever challenges lay ahead, the complexities of court politics, the vast difference in their stations, the expectations placed upon an Ottoman emperor, they would face them together, forging a path as unique and unexpected as the connection that had begun with a sick horse and a brave herbalist who dared to offer her knowledge to an emperor. As they rode side by side down the mountain path, Violet glanced at Xavier's profile, strong and thoughtful against the spring sky. What will happen when we return to Istanbul? She asked quietly. Xavier smiled, the private smile she had come to treasure. That, my dear Violet, is a story yet to be written. But I promise you this, it will be extraordinary. And as the imperial procession continued its journey toward Istanbul, the mountain breeze carried the scent of new beginnings, of ancient wisdom meeting modern power, and of two hearts finding their way despite the boundaries that had once seemed insurmountable.